Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is the 3 core executive functions and test prep. But first, let's meet our special guest, Ariel Lieberman.
Ariel Lieberman is the founder of Your Best Prep, a tutoring company based in Westchester County, New York that helps high school students, both neurotypical and those with learning differences, master the standardized test prep process and achieve their academic goals. Prior to founding Your Best Prep, Ariel wrote SAT and AP curriculum for Ivy Consulting Group in New York City, where she also worked as a GED tutor for young adults in the criminal justice system as a member of the Ivy League Tutors Foundation. Welcome.
Hi, guys. So nice to be here.
Ariel, it is so nice to have you back, not just because you're a dear friend that we see way too infrequently.
Way too little.
But we got a hot topic today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
We are too, but before we get into that, last time you were here was in episode 194 for Test Prep Profile. Presume that people don't remember the content of that profile, so please tell us a bit about yourself and your practice.
Yeah, so my tutoring experience began in 2008 now, quite some time ago, when I was working for a boutique tutoring and test prep company writing curriculum. And from there, I realized that test prep was something that was more than just a job to do while I was in college. I absolutely loved it. Went off on my own, started to build a practice, ultimately decided to dedicate my practice to helping students who learn differently, primarily. And I went to grad school for teaching and have since really applied all of that pedagogy to my tutoring work, and I have loved it. It's been 10 years this year that I founded my own business.
That's fantastic. And you're based in upstate New York. Well, not really upstate New York, Westchester.
It depends who you ask. If you ask someone from Manhattan, they'll say it's upstate. If you ask,
you're north of White Plains, so technically.
Yes. So I'm in Westchester, New York. Although I will say I have students from all around. Right now, I have a student in Utah. I have a student in Florida. So I can see students remotely as well, which I think is something we'll talk about during the episode as well.
Someday, guys, I'm going to put a map of New York and the greater New York City region on my wall. So when you guys talk about these places, I actually can visually understand where they are.
Yes. So start studying, and there'll be a quiz next time I'm on the show.
That's right. It's like between New Jersey and New York City. I'm like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but I just don't know where is where.
Totally.
There's a tremendous density in terms of neighborhoods and towns.
There really are.
And tutors.
Yeah.
Tons of tutors in the New York.
We're a dime a dozen around here.
But you don't charge a dime a dozen.
You do not. Not in this market.
Yeah. Well, now you're actually, though, at your own home. I'm wondering, how old are your kids now? They're share with our audience. Because since we saw you last, I think maybe you're one more than you were the last time.
It's possible I might even be 2 more than the last time.
I know it might be.
Yeah, I think so.
So I have a 3-year-old and an almost 10-month-old. So
they're not quite yet ready for executive function, but you'll start to observe this, right? Probably you're seeing a little bit of that with your 3-year-old, right?
Absolutely. And I'm trying to sort of instill good habits now because I see, I got a ton of kids walking into my office and I think to myself, gosh, if someone had just intervened earlier. So yes, my 3-year-old is among the more organized and planful 3-year-olds I know, I must say.
So would you say it's never too early to start working on executive functions with your kids?
I think it's never too early to, begin developing the higher order thinking skills that children and ultimately young adults and then adults need to be successful in the world. Absolutely. And that's what executive function comes down to.
So what are some of these core executive functions and why are they important for students?
Yeah. So first of all, let's just define what executive functions are. So the executive functions are all of the mental processes that we use every single day to solve problems, manage tasks, basically to be a functional person on planet Earth. We are using our executive functions. And the three biggies that most people talk about are working memory, cognitive flexibility, and inhibitory control. And those are very fancy words for your memory. The working memory is, in other words, your brain's sticky notes. It's where you hold on to information and work with it in real time. Cognitive flexibility is, again, a fancy term for just being adaptable. And inhibitory control is a term for your impulse control. And these things are so important because, as we know, being able to work through issues in real time, being able to adapt when a roadblock comes your way, this is critically important in life and in test prep, but it's about much more than just test prep.
It's interesting talking about memory because obviously Mike and I spent a lot of time talking about like learning and education. And so two of the things that you just mentioned, right? These remind me, Mike, of some of the COVID learning loss skills. And one of them, we talk about retention or memory. And the other is the flexibility, right? Like, so it's interesting that some of these functions may have diminished a little bit with COVID with our students in terms of what we're seeing their capabilities that are now versus in years prior. I wonder if you're seeing that too.
I agree. And I feel like, you're talking about the conversation we had with Nancy Weinstein from Mindprint. And Mindprint doesn't assess inhibition control. And I really wonder, because that is something, right? Like when students got used to, if they didn't feel like persevering through a class, they could just turn off their camera and their screen, right? And so there's this idea that inhibition control may be the secret sauce. It's persistence, right? It's resilience. It's the ability to stick with something that you're not that interested in right now in order to see future gains.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting that those are some of the things that came up during the COVID learning loss research, because I haven't read a lot of that, but that makes sense to me because these are skills that we build by engaging in difficult tasks with the world every day. And during COVID, when kids were stuck inside and not really grappling with real world issues, it makes sense to me that those muscles would atrophy.
So when we're talking about those different executive functions, I'm wondering in terms of for students who have, let's say, weaker executive functioning skills, how would you say you're observing that affects students in test prep?
So many ways, obviously we are all biased as test prep professionals, but I genuinely believe that the process of preparing for these tests is a sort of a microcosm of the real world in many.
Agreed completely.
Yeah. And so the working memory part of things, if a student is struggling or a child is struggling with working memory, it's hard to retain and process complex information on the spot. So that might mean that during tutoring or during practice tests, a student can't hold on to multiple steps in a problem, or their problem solving may be slowed down by an inability to keep track of what they're holding on to in their brain. That's a big one.
It's really interesting that you point that out, right? Because don't we see that many of the most challenging test questions are the multi-step questions?
Correct.
That absolutely require students to retain not just information from step to step, but remember what they started doing and not stop halfway thinking that they're done because they forgot how many steps they needed to take.
Right. Where am I in this problem and why am I even here? How did I even get here? We see that all the time with the multi-step problems. Absolutely. The cognitive flexibility piece, those are these kids we see who, when their first attempt doesn't work to solve something, they can't find another way. They're unable to find another way, or they stick with what isn't working. It's like, well, the road's closed. I guess I'm just stuck here now.
Yeah, we encounter so many students that are kind of rigid, especially when it comes to solving math problems, where they're like, I don't know how to solve that particular problem, not realizing that they might never see a problem like that again, but they are tested on the same skills and the same content. And a lot of people who have that rigidity, they want an algorithm for every possible question when the exams test that flexibility that you're talking about.
It's interesting. They tend to compartmentalize every single concept, right? So but it speaks to what you're saying is in terms of the flexibility, right? If we pigeonhole concepts, then we don't have much flexibility with our thinking to be able to sort of see in one problem how it connects, in another problem or in another way. I'm wondering, just to kind of go back to some of the things we've just talked about, do you have any strategies or suggestions based upon these items we've talked about, like that you find in your test prep with students is helpful for students with these challenges?
Absolutely. 100%. So I find that, I have experienced executive function coaching as well, and I have a certificate in that. I am an executive function coach in addition to a test prep tutor, but that is not to say that people cannot integrate executive function support into their tutoring or into their parenting, make it part and parcel. So what are some of those ways? So one thing with the working memory piece is teaching and modeling effective note taking, right? Mm-hmm. How many of these kids sit in front of us and stare blankly at us as we're working through a problem and their pencil hasn't hit the paper? And I'll often find myself saying, wait, why am I writing? I know how to do this problem. You're the one who doesn't know how to do this. So modeling that and explicitly teaching that, I think a lot of times parents and tutors are like, my kid won't take notes, or this student won't take notes. A lot of times kids don't know how. And so if you can explicitly teach kids in the beginning of your sessions, this is what your notes should look like. This is what I want you to have to refer back to. That supports working memory. Even things as simple as forcing students to show their work, right?
Oh, 100%, right.
So they're not lost in those multi-step problems. Things like that are huge. In terms of the cognitive flexibility piece, that rigidity, what came to mind when Mike brought that up was I was thinking about the old SAT system of equations questions, systems of linear equations that almost always were best solved through elimination.
Yeah,
right.
For some reason,
which is still
true,
but not
with Desmos,
not as
though.
basic and as cut and dried as it used to be.
Right. But for some reason, I don't know if this is just a New York thing, but my students in New York, they always prefer substitution.
No, that is,
always.
Guys.
Well, right, because that's like the only thing that was really taught. It was really emphasized.
The first test prep, legitimate pedagogical test prep question I had, this was probably back in 2017 when I was really first engaging with other test prep professionals. This was in Boston, Mike. I brought up systems because I was like, this is a mystery to me. But it was also about prioritization. What skill do you think? And that was exactly it. We were all like, no, elimination is the key, right? And this is obviously back in pre-2024 SAT, but yeah.
Totally. I don't know what it is, but they're insistent on using substitution. So in terms of the cognitive flexibility, even just teaching more than one way to solve the problem is critical. After your kid gets the answer, let's go back. Let's evaluate. Let's talk about some other ways we could have solved this. Which one do you think is the most efficient?
Well, I think what you're describing, to me, ideal test prep is, I always say to students, you may be coming to me with an empty toolbox. And part of our goal, right, which would encourage flexible thinking, is the more strategies, tips we can put into the toolbox. When we open it up, it's not like, the old analogy, you can't use a hammer for every single thing. You might try, but the problem becomes when the hammer doesn't work, you're like left with nothing. So it's about coming up with other tools, other ways of thinking, which again, that whole idea of just flexible thinking, right?
Right. That's exactly That's exactly it, is do you have the other tools and do you know how to use them in the toolbox?
So I wanted to talk to you about an interesting article that came out not long ago, and it really should have come as no surprise that you were friends with the author. And she wrote a Substack about the false promise of EF coaching. And basically it was like, well, you can't just do executive function coaching in a vacuum. It has to be embedded in some kind of academic or test prep context. What's your experience with that? Is there validity to, I mean, she has research, of course, she has receipts, but what do you find in that regard?
I couldn't agree more. I personally do not do any executive function coaching with students that is separate from the framework of their academics. So for example, if a lot of their issues are related to the home and their activities of daily living, that ain't me. I don't necessarily believe that that's effective. And I know that Katie had all the research in her article. And while I can't really speak to all of that research, what I find is that when we're talking about kids and teenagers, we know that first and foremost is buy-in. They have to buy into this. And so if we're talking about a kid who is a little bit of a mess and we're trying to get them to get it together, the buy-in piece can't be, here's one more, we're not going to get any buy-in by saying, here's yet another thing I'm going to put on your plate. Here's another place you have to show up. Here's another thing you need a binder for. Here's another thing you need to make space in your brain for.
Another burden on your cognitive load.
Right, totally, totally, right? So when we teach executive function within the framework of academics, we can get the buy-in because students see.
Well, you see the immediate practical application of the work, right?
Yes, you see how this is going to be meaningful. How is this going to actually help me?
You address the symptoms as a way to get buy-in for fixing the root cause.
Absolutely. And it's a two birds, one stone, right? If I'm improving your overall executive function skills and in the process, you're getting your paper done earlier and in a more efficient way, and it's a better work product by the end of it, great.
Yeah. In the summertime, that's what's tricky when parents approach you in the summertime and they want this kind of help because they think, oh, they're less burdened or busy. And I know I've said, no, you don't get it. Like, that's why it either has to happen during the school year or test prep can be a meaningful place to use that in conjunction with executive function work in the summer, because it's kind of like you don't want it separate, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate you both articulating that because I found a long time ago, we were releasing, study skills and note taking, and people would ask over the summer and be like, well, this isn't really right. And it was hard to understand then why, but it of course makes perfect sense. You have to focus on something that's already relevant. And this is to make a student's life easier, to build long-term skills, but address the short-term need, which is very much what test prep, like on the other side, right? When people come to us for higher SAT or ACT scores, for example, they should walk away with those scores, but for the rest of their lives, they should have better reading, writing, problem-solving skills to bring to all different contexts.
That's probably one of my favorite compliments I ever get is when somebody, and especially if it's even a few years later after they finish or I've talked to their parents, when they say, you taught me how to be a better student.
Yes.
Right? Like there's nothing better than feeling like you left this process with something that is now applicable to all areas of your life, right? And I think test prep is a rich area for that because there's a lot, right? There is content, there is knowledge, there is recognition, there's application, there's time management. I mean, there's so many different things you can build into what you have to do that it's really fertile ground for teaching these skills.
Absolutely. I mean, many of the things you just listed fall under executive function skills. That is what we need. Yeah. And I think this is also something that I bring up with parents, and I know we've talked about this, just on our own as tutors before, but that the SAT prep or the standardized test prep is about much more than the score, right? It's about this longer lasting thing, becoming a better student overall. And I think that executive function fits into that really, really nicely, which is that if we can develop executive function skills through the test prep process, regardless of what the score is at the end of the day, this student is leaving a stronger thinker, a more organized student, a student who has better impulse control, all of these things that, as we know, is going to serve them far beyond just the score at the end of the day.
I love that. Okay, I have a thorny question to touch on. I'm sure you all get these calls. The students that have certain learning disabilities or deficient executive function skills, they or their parents think that they need to meet in person, that they can't possibly work remotely when a lot of one-to-one instruction is now done remotely for a lot of good reasons. But is this an area, Ariel, where uh, where exceptions should be made, or do you find that remote instruction does not impede the effectiveness of executive function coaching?
So yeah, thorny question. And I think I have a thorny answer, which is that I personally feel that it really depends on the student. But if we are talking about a student who has um, pretty profound identified attention deficits or executive function deficits, I want them in my office. You know, I just, I cannot do my job as well. Can I do it? Absolutely. But when I get calls from parents saying, I need an executive function coach, but we live X miles away, we can't come in person, I will typically say, that's not my game. If they are really pushy, as clients can sometimes be, I'll say, let's give it a couple sessions, let's see. But I genuinely believe that if we're talking about a kid who can't really keep their physical space together, let's say, right? Their binders are a mess, their notes are a mess, their mental space is a mess. I need to physically be with them, looking at their materials, demonstrating for them, providing sort of explicit instruction for them on how to organize things like that. If we're talking about purely standardized test prep, I think we can make it work remotely. I'll allow it, Mike. I'll allow it.
You'll allow it. Do you find
This,
like document cameras are valuable in what you do? Because I know that I've
I
never
don't use
used
them.
one,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you want to see the students' setup.
So I used to be a big document camera person, and it ended up just being too much of a hassle tech-wise, like
It is a
the
hassle, yes.
screens and the this and the that. If there was a way that I could efficiently see what a student was doing with their hands, um, you know, that would probably do it. But I mean, I can think of one student in particular right now where I will often say, tilt your screen down. I need to see what you're doing with your hands. Tilt your screen down, because there's
Yeah.
a phone or a who even knows, what we're doing with. I don't even
Who
want to
even
know.
knows?
Who
Don't do
even know? I don't even want to know.
that.
But it's like I need to see your hands at all times.
Got a beer in one hand.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are we doing over there?
Although I
So
will say, when I've done some kind of academic coaching with students in the office, there is a part of the work that I've done with them where I do like being able to see their physical learning space.
yes.
Where is it? What does it look like? What supplies do you keep there? Like, how do you set yourself up for success in terms of your working space, right? Because sometimes, as you can imagine, you're going to find out, well, I don't have one, or
Oh
so
yeah.
there are ways. So for me, I've set that up, but I do agree it's tricky. The attention piece is probably the most problematic because it is far more difficult remotely to be judging that attention. There are certain behaviors you can look at, like are their eyes down or their eyes to the side, or do they appear to be looking at you directly in the screen? But
Right.
there's no question that sometimes you'll see lights light up and they're doing something, and then that is the attention piece becomes an issue for sure. But I don't buy into the document cameras, but I'll sometimes say, well, show me, hold up,
Yeah.
hold up to the screen what you got. Like, let me see what you got there. Or I don't see you moving, which means you're probably not writing, those
Yep.
kinds of things.
Absolutely.
But I totally
Absolutely.
feel on the attention issues for sure.
Yeah, and I think like most things, it really depends on the student, and what that student's individual need is. But I have found that if we're talking about pure executive function coaching, I want I want I want us to be, in the same room. I want to be able to do my favorite binder check where I grab your binder and I give it a shake, and does everything come crashing out dramatically. So
Where you
all of
dump out the backpack and you go through it item by
totally
item to
that.
figure out what's in there.
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
that, there are certain scenarios where in person is preferable, but I think in this day and age, we have to find ways to do things remotely effectively and efficiently because that's the world we're living in.
I'm definitely going to keep you away from my instructional binder, Ariel.
Yeah.
So we've covered so much, but I want to give you the last word. Is there one final point that any students, parents, tutors, educators should think about when we're talking about executive function and test preparation?
Yeah, I think two main things. The first is that, and I said this before, but I want to reiterate it because I think it's really important that you don't have to be a certified or professional executive function coach to effectively integrate executive function building strategies into your parenting or tutoring. That's the first thing, I think. And the second thing is to remember, because I find myself sometimes forgetting this too, and this is the whole population I work with, and I still forget, is that sometimes what we are seeing as an unwillingness to do something on a student's part is a lack of knowledge or a lack of understanding. I cannot tell you how many students don't know how to plan out their week or don't know how to take efficient notes, right? And so if you sort of I think tutors are afraid to take time sometimes because they don't want the kid to become overly reliant on them and so on and so forth to do those things for them. But if we can teach and model how to do these things, a lot of times what we think is just an unwillingness or a laziness magically sort of resolves itself.
That is beautiful. Ariel, we'd love to speak with you all day about this topic. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you both.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Please visit my website at www.yourbestprep.com.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.